So Nilkant, my recollection is roughly in last 30 years, I think in early 90s, our economy is around $200 billion or so. It's grown more than 10x. I think we have maintained that 6 to 7% range pretty much throughout this entire 30 years, despite, many changes and so on, which has kind of compounded over last, 30 years. And we are now, $3+ trillion economy and aspiring, depending on time horizon, aspiring for 10 or 20 or even more, right, in coming decades. What are some of the big things, which is like what has fundamentally changed in India compared to, if you compare, just take, early 90s, let's say the window of India of that time to India of now. What are all the things that are working, which are, driving this engine forward where whatever happens, I think we tend to grow in 6 to 7%. I don't think anybody thinks that, growth rate will slow down below 6%, 7% plus will be amazing. But what are those things which are really starting to work for India and are working not here and now, but just being, have emerged as a steady trend in favor of, what is creating this, favorable situation for the country?
Yeah, so that I think has many drivers, and which is what, we have to always remember that India is the sixth of humanity.
Right.
We are now, I'm tired of people saying, why can't we be like Singapore? We can't be like Singapore, right? Singapore is like Dadar, right? I mean, so you can improve Dadar if you give them complete monopoly and all of that, but I don't think that's practical. So we are a sixth of humanity. So it has to be a whole range of drivers. It cannot be one, right? Yeah. So the first, and I think most important, is that this whole assessment that I've had that, progress comes in layers. You build something, build on top of that, build on top of that, and you keep doing that, right? You cannot stop. So the first, I think, was just when I think about, integrating a large part of India into the economy. One of the most important takeaways for me from my Hindustan Lever training was this rural stint we had in Eta, Bundelkhand. Of the many things we learned there, I mean, I've been to villages, I've been to very poor villages, but when you go to a village and you're from a landowning family, you are privileged, and dadi bhook lagi, dada khana mil jayega and all that, but when you're living with them, right, you learn different things. You realize that they could have been living in any country. They had no idea how the Prime Minister was. They had no idea how the Chief Minister was, because there was no road. This I'm talking 98, right? And so no roads, no electricity, no TV. And I don't think their lives had changed for several hundred years. Right? Just the tax collector had changed. So the first thing is, and remember that in the year 2000, 54% of India's habitations did not have all-weather road connectivity.
50%.
Yeah. Can you believe that, and the states that were prosperous at that time, Haryana, Punjab, Kerala, they had 100% habitation connectivity. So if half of your habitations have no way of connecting with the economy, how can you grow?
And where are we today in terms of this habitation connectivity?
95, 96%, depends. So now what they've done is that the 2000 plus habitations are now fully connected.
Right.
They've gone to 1000. I think at 500 habitation level, maybe there is few percent still.
So that's a sea change, basically remaining half of the population
has been connected.
Basically 10% of humanity has been connected over the last 20 years.
Yes. And maybe 23, 24 years, right? So because 2000, I think, was when the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana was launched.
Right.
And I remember that in our village, we didn't have electricity till the road finally came. And there were several attempts made to bring electricity to the village. But you can't do that till you have a road.
Correct.
Suppose the transformer burns or someone just snips some wire. How will the engineer go and test? So the first step to getting anything else is to get the road. If you have the road, suddenly the labor rates start going up because it's so much easier to travel nearby, and then suddenly the labor market becomes more efficient. Perishable vegetables, milk starts moving out, and education, health all start moving in. Maternal mortality drops, infant mortality drops, right? So there are many important changes that happen once you just build that last mile rural road. Begs the question, why wasn't this done earlier, right? But we can discuss that in maybe the next question. Once you have this, and then the electrification starts, So you have, even in the 2011 census, 1/3 of India's households did not have wires going into their houses. See, we are not talking about houses that had wires, how many hours of electricity they had, right? I remember when I was presenting to the board of a very large consumer company on my silent transformation report of 2013, that how roads, electricity and phones are changing India. He said, ये तो TV देखते ही नहीं है. What will I do with them? Right? Because you can't build brands, so then how can you sell? And so there was no, so even if the houses that had electricity, the wires going, they did not have sufficient electricity. But once you get electricity, see, if you think of human civilization, it's all about energy. Right? So right from the thing that we digest our food outside our bodies.
Correct.
So we need cooking. In fact, as Václav Smil writes in Energy and Civilization, that the size of a medieval European city was determined by the size of the forest around it. Because you needed wood for cooking, you needed wood for baking bricks, for smelting iron, and a lot of other things, warming, heating. हमारे यहाँ जरूरत नहीं पड़ती, but Now, if you don't have access to dense sources of energy, how will you grow? So there's this fascinating story about this American president growing in 1930s rural Texas. And so every woman there had a hunched shoulder. He won his first election saying that you will stop looking like your mother.
Wow.
I will bring electricity. Because they had
Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah. You had to pull water out of the well. You have to do manual cleansing of laundry, and so lots of other things that they had to do manually.
And 1930 was just 100 years ago. Today is impossible to imagine in America.
Yeah.
Not too distant past.
Agreed.
It was very similar to what you're describing is how, life has been in many Indian villages until recently.
Correct. And now, so electricity, once it starts spreading, common, you would know, and I mean, you would have grown up the way, same way I did. All our masala was cooked or was ground on the silot loda, that was mortar pestle, right? And today in rural Bihar, in the poorest of households, people are using mixer grinders. That's huge productivity growth.
Yeah.
Right? Piped water connections, right? Imagine walking 5 hours or 5 kilometers to fetch water. And imagine washing clothes, washing your hands, taking a bath, cooking with buckets.
Yeah, see, on this point, I have to mention, seems very theoretical, at least those of us in Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi. But in my place, I grew up in Haridwar, वहाँ पे कभी-कभी पानी चले जाता था. Some major pipe has burst, फिर 5 दिन तक पानी नहीं है. And you literally have to, we as children everyone was given a bucket. You have to walk 2 kilometers. फिर टैंकर आएगा, पानी उसमें भरो, बकेट में वापस लेके आओ.
Absolutely. We have done that. We've done all that. And घर में एक टीना रखा होगा. And I'm talking Bokaro, which was one of the better managed townships. और उसमें जंग लग रही है, तो I remember with my father painting the inside of that large tank where the water would be kept.
Correct.
And think about energy. I mean, I have seen my mother because वो राशन के उसमें kerosene खत्म हो गया. And we were middle class family. We are not poor families, right? My father was an engineer. And उसमें वो kerosene खत्म हो गया. तो वो जो चोरी का कोयला बिकता था, तो then she would then put layers of mud on the stove and then start cook our food.
Yeah, correct.
Such a waste of time.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so electricity came.
Yeah.
Then phones came. Right. And here we have, I think, been privileged by global innovations which brought down the cost of a phone.
Right.
And you would have read about that famous study in Kerala in 2007-8,
right.
How that fish prices. So that those things, and labor is the most perishable commodity. People talk about fish, labor is most perishable. You spend 3 hours looking for a job, you not work for 3 hours. And so suddenly, when the phone started going up, right? So till 2008, remember, tele-density in rural India was 10%. 90% of the people had no access to phones.
Right.
And it jumped up to 55% by 2013-14. Unfortunately, it has stagnated at 60%, right? So I think it needs to go up. Maybe the BSNL, the new launches that we are seeing at 4G expansion, it will
Mobile phone penetration still stuck at 60%.
rural teledensity is 60%, but whether it should be 100% or not is a different question altogether, right? Because should all adults have a phone or not? Should all kids have phone? Or not? So those are different questions. But the point is that it was very low in 2008 and suddenly by 2014. And the whole point was, if you think about it from a telecom company's perspective, if you are running a telecom tower on gensets, it's not viable.
Right.
You need regular electricity.
Correct.
Now, once you have all of this, then suddenly you are building new and fascinating layers, right? Like Jan Dhan Yojana. The nationalization of banks that started or happened in the 60s and 70s was all to drive rural penetration of banks. But how do you do rural penetration of banks or improve the rural penetration of banks if it is so expensive to do banking?
Right.
Right. So someone had done a study a decade back, I'm sure costs are different now, that per transaction in a bank branch, it cost the bank 70 rupees. I mean, I'm sure it was varied over banks and branches, but per ATM transaction at that time was 17, 18 rupees.
Right.
And mobile transaction was 1 or 2 rupees. Assume that you go to the bank branch once a month. You're costing the bank 700 rupees. Assuming that the net interest margin for a bank is say 4%, right? So you need at least 18,000 rupees in average savings for your account to be viable. Right? How many people have that? Now, till you could do 1 rupee per transaction or a fraction of a rupee per transaction, it was impossible to give everyone bank accounts. That was only possible through mobile phones. Right. And so you build roads, you build electricity that provides productivity boost in a lot of places. Then you add phones. Then you have bank accounts.
Right.
Suddenly, the efficiency of the state has gone up dramatically.
Right.
Right. So the direct benefits transfer, the leakages, and remember, this is also a subject which I am not an expert in. I'm not a sociologist or a political. That way, I'm not even an economist. But at least I've studied economics a bit. The formation of the country was if the only time the state reaches out to you is when it has to harass you.
Right.
Is a bad way to build a country. Right. But if you, as a citizen, start getting direct transfers into your account, that your house can be made pakka,
Right.
that, there is COVID happening, so let's take 1,000 rupees, right? Or the food comes to you directly and all that, right? So I think these are very important ways in which you build a country, build a nation, right?
So, a lot of what you're saying, the last 30 years, a lot of these foundational elements, layer by layer, have gotten built, and then the entire, 1.4 billion population in some ways connected to the larger economy and starting to be productive, starting to definitely get information, contribute, benefit from it. And that's kind of, that big foundation layer is set.
Yes. Now, there is a second big transformation that is happening. So this is what I call the micro infrastructure. Right. And remember that micro infrastructure is not fully done yet, in the sense that India's broadband connection is still pathetic. Right. The reason why our mobile data consumption, average mobile data consumption is the highest in the world, because there is no broadband and no Wi-Fi, right? And I think going from single digits to 30-40% in the next 5-7 years will again transform India.
And that is happening?
That is happening. I think that is well underway. Because see, what has happened, the first step to doing that, and it's a political problem. The reason why cables could not be laid was because that is how local territories are mapped by the goons.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you would remember that, but I have only just figured out, a couple of years back, that the reason why the gundas in the vicinity, in the locality, ran the cable TV network was it was actually about hard physical capture.
Right.
Right? No one else would be allowed in. Because you're talking about territory control.
Correct.
Right? So anyway, so those things I think are starting to happen.